Hello, everyone, and welcome to TheoCon, where theology meets pop culture, where faith meets fiction, and the sacred meets the secular, and for today, where worship meets Wakanda. That is so hot. I love that. I made that up myself. Anyway, I am the founder and creator of TheoCon, where theology meets pop culture, but of course, what is a founder and creator without their team? I'm so grateful for my teammates who are here with me today, and I will allow them to introduce themselves.
Reverend.
Why, thank you, Professor. I'm Brian Bennett. I am I'm a campus pastor in Pittsburgh, PA, but founder and co-host of Church of the Geek podcast.
And my name is Matthew Brake. I'm the founder and editor of the Popular Culture and Theology blog site and the series editor for the Theology and Pop Culture series, and co-editor of the Religion and Comics series. That's forthcoming, so don't Google it. You won't find it. And then adjunct professor at Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason University.
Excellent. And I do want to acknowledge some of our teammates who were not able to be here with us today. Missy Whitus, Pastor Will Rose, and Jacqueline Fuller. Just wanted to give them some acknowledgments. Now we are going to transition into the portion of our show, which is called Theo Conversations. I love that. So I'm now going to hand it over to Matt. And if you want to give us a little bit of background about Black Panther and introduce our special guest today.
Sure. Well, unless you were living under a rock in 2018, you probably heard a lot of cultural buzz around the movie Black Panther. Aside from Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, it's probably one of the arguably most important movies Marvel's released, arguably one of the most popular Marvel has released, in part because of how it centered sort of an Afro-futuristic experience. And so after it, so Black Panther, if you don't know, is one of the first Black superheroes. I can't remember if it's actually him or the Falcon. That's one of the first. But he debuted in Fantastic Four, number 52, all the way back in July 1966. He's been a member of the Avengers. He's been an ally of the Fantastic Four. And he's been a staple in terms of Marvel's superheroes. So after the movie came out and it created a bunch of buzz, I had a friend really, really push me hard on doing a Black Panther and theology volume for the series when it was new and in its early inception. And so I started to look around for people to contribute. I was looking for contributors, possible co-editors, and that is when I stumbled across the website for Reverend Kimberly Hampton, who on her blog has a syllabus which she calls the Wakanda Forever, Black Panther, and Theology Syllabus. So I reached out to Kim and was like, hey, would you co-edit this volume with me, which has definitely been a labor of love because it suffered from delays, delinquent authors, and all sorts of stuff. But we're hammering it home now. But I wanted to invite Kim on, talk about herself, and talk about her interest in, love of Black Panther, and some of the work she's doing. She was already doing way before I ever contacted her. So Reverend Kimberly Hampton, welcome to Theo Conversations. And if you could just tell us a little bit, we'll get to the Black Panther stuff in a moment, but tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, and then, yeah, I know you're involved in ministry and some various things. So just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thank you all for inviting me. This is fabulous. And again, the Wakanda backgrounds just make my heart sing. As Matthew said, my name is Kim Hampton. Right now, because COVID has changed everybody's life, I am in my hometown of St. Louis, sitting in my parents' den, which it's great to have parents who have it in, who are still spry and full of life, and so I'm always thankful for that. But if this were any other ordinary non-COVID related time, I would be splitting my time between here in St. Louis and Boston, Massachusetts, where I did my ministerial internship, and keeping denominational stuff on a half front burner, but most of the time trying to put it on the back burner. Religiously, I am a mutt. I am a Unitarian Universalist on the days when they aren't pissing me off. And on the days when I just want to chuck it all, I go back to, I grew up Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so I always straddle two worlds. And half of the time it's not just two, it's three, because I grew up in a half Black, half Jewish neighborhood. So I'm always trying to learn more about Judaism. So whatever you want to call me, you can call me. Mutt actually fits best. I did my undergraduate work in political science and sociology. Went to school in Texas at Texas Women's University, which is in Denton, Texas, which for people who will be watching is the third part of what they call the Golden Triangle, which is Dallas, Fort Worth, and Denton. Denton is the northernmost city of the triangle. So after I finished my undergrad, spent an extra year in Texas, came back to Missouri for a bit, then moved around a little, and eventually figured out that my arms really were too short to box with God, and decided to go to seminary, and ended up at Earlham School of Religion, which is a very small Quaker school in the backwoods of eastern Indiana, right on the Ohio-Indiana border on I-70 for people who drive that. It's literally on the border. And Indiana was an experience, which is always the best thing I can say about Indiana. And did my last year at Earlham, I did my internship in Worcester, Mass, which is the furthest most suburb of Boston. It is the second largest city in New England. They love to point that out. And because I was doing it in a UU setting, New England, if you're gonna be a UU, New England is kind of the place to be one, because there's a church on almost every street corner, and if not, they have the town green, and if they don't have the town green, it's the Congregationalist church that has the town green, and the UU congregation is like 3 doors down because of the big fights that happened in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So whichever side won the fight got the building on the green. And so did my internship, came back to Missouri because my father was going through some health issues, and decided that I kind of liked not being in a congregation. Much as I like congregations, I decided that congregational ministry probably wasn't for me, at least not in the UU context. I keep going back and forth on it, and as to whether I'm going to try for the disciples or not. But so I decided to start doing consulting work. And so I do consulting work with churches, mostly with church boards who are trying to figure out how to talk about their mission and how to make their mission operationalized. So I do that most of the time. The other time I spend in pop culture, not comics as much. I did that when I was younger. Although I did stay with Black Panther and the X-Men. And so most of the time I deal with romance novels. So I look at theology and romance novels and the whole idea of what love means and that. And I spend some time critiquing television. So it's a fairly full life. If we weren't in the midst of COVID, there might be a 19-month-old running around. You could see her. My cousin, who I take care of, because her parents don't have to worry about shelling out daycare center money. But that's my life most of the time. And between babies and parents who are getting older and all that, it's kind of full. So that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. I didn't know about the romance novel thing. Apparently, it's not my bag, but it's a big thing in pop culture studies. Apparently,
I've one of my dear friends is a professor down at Clark Atlanta, and she is a part of is actually getting ready to do a conference presentation for the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You mean my people are actually gathering somewhere virtually? And this week is kind of crazy for me. Otherwise, I'd be trying to do everything related to that. And so I now have new people. It makes me so happy.
There, last year, I think 2019, there was a conference at Bowling Green State University on Batman. This year's conference, I think it got canceled or moved to digital, was going to be on romance novels and fiction. And Bowling Green has this giant pop culture library with tons of romance novels. It's worth looking into. Like,
I can do that. That's yeah,
that'll be
Post it.
Well, we can come back to that because that would be that's definitely an interesting topic. I'm sure we can circle back around to the romance novel side because that's an unexpected plot twist in this conversation. I am curious. And this is going to be a two-part question. One, am I right about Black Panther being the first Black superhero?
I think Falcon was by about 2 years. I could have it mixed up that Black Panther came out first and then Falcon. Because I think it's the other way around. I think it was Falcon first and then Black Panther. But I mean, it came almost back to back. So we can all be forgiven for not knowing which one actually came first.
Well, that's good. The second thing is, tell us about. So you said you've stuck with Black Panther now. When did that? What was the inception of that? Because you obviously you love the character enough to have made a syllabus based on Black Panther and to co-edit a volume on Black Panther. So when did that love of the character come up? Was it, are you still into the comics? Was it initially in the comics and then the movie? When did that love of the character first come to you, and why? Like, what is it about the character that draws you in?
It's kind of a mix. I read it when I was young and liked the whole idea of a comic based in Africa because there's so little that we in the West get about Africa. And granted, because it was Western people doing it, there are a whole bunch of things, especially in the early volumes of Black Panther, we probably should revisit at some point. But that the whole idea of something based in Africa with Africans as the main drivers of the action and not being ancillary characters to some European who comes in and thinks they're gonna civilize us is always, I love that idea. And so I read them when I was young, took a break for a while, as one always does in college. You take a break from everything. Took a break from it in college, came back to it off and on. Then the movie comes, and it's like, oh, they're actually going to do a movie about Black Panther. This will be interesting. And then the movie comes out, and it's fabulous. And I go see it in theater 6 times. And I hate movie theaters. Absolutely hate them. Hate them with almost every fiber of my being, kind of hate. But I went and sat in a theater 6 times. The first, because I went and saw it on opening day. And part of the reason I don't like movie theaters is I don't like crowds. I'm not a crowd person. I don't do well in them. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the earliest showing I can get to so I don't have to deal with as much of a crowd and all that. And so I get there. And it was my plan to avoid a crowd. But the first showing was sold out. And so I was like, okay, then I'll go all the way up to the back, get the furthest away seat that I can get. Maybe, folk will figure out that I'm trying to watch the movie and not worry about them. And for the most part, because I picked the furthest corner I could, I had the seat next to me was empty, so I was okay. And it was so good. I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this? How do I talk about everything? And, I've got to see it again because I missed stuff. And so every time I went to see it, it was like, I missed something. This scene means this, but I really need to see it again to make sure it really means that. And so it went that way, which is how I ended up seeing it 6 times. And I started thinking that because there's so much in it that people who are theology people might be interested in, but don't know where to start when it comes to looking at Africa in a non-Western focused way, that the way to do it was to come up with a syllabus, an ever expanding syllabus, even though I haven't touched it for a year, that will give people a way in to thinking about all the different themes of the movie.
Very cool. Well, and that was kind of going to be my third question. It's like, when did you start did you start it, like after your second or third showing? Is that when you were like, I need to get this down on paper?
It started after the second one, because the second time I went with a friend who's a military chaplain. And they wanted to look at the movie and then talk about how they could actually bring different themes into their sermons from when they're on base. And my friend Julie and I sat, and we went to the movie, went and had lunch, sat around for 2 hours and talked about different ways of approaching how to preach about different themes in a military context when it comes to the movie. And then we talked more generally about it, and I was like, this could actually work. And so it was like, okay, let me think about this for a minute. And can I really come up with a syllabus? And it started from there.
So looking at the syllabus now, like I think it's 5 parts. Am I counting right?
It's 5 right now. Yeah, I haven't done the womanism part yet. The last section is Katie Cannon.
Yeah.
And so I haven't done the womanism part, the full Black theology part, because there are some authors and theologians I think need to be in there. I want to do a section on Egyptian mythology, because Bast is an Egyptian mythological god. So I'm trying to figure out how to put that in a way that doesn't negate the contemporary context of Northern Africa.
Is Bast, so you said he's, I didn't know this. So I'm really afraid that in one of the things I've written about Black Panther, I'm like, yeah, this made up God or whatever. I'm really afraid that, now is Bast a Panther deity, or is that something that Black Panther takes liberty with?
It's a little bit of both. There are some liberties taken with Bast, but Bast in Egyptian mythology is in the cat family.
Okay.
So that they made it a panther in and of itself. Yeah, that's a little creative fiction, but it's not that far off.
Crap, I may have to recant something. So you have a lot of stuff in here. So you start off with the first unit you have in here, Afrofuturism.
Mm-hmm.
I want to highlight for people that you have. I mean, this is a great list too. Like, one of the things, I know, especially right now in our culture, questions over systemic racism, police brutality, and so on. I know that the thing I always hear and always see, and I think it's true, is, you don't ask your Black friends to continually justify themselves, like, because people can do their own research, right? And so for people who are interested in partaking in conversations about issues of race and racism, this is a great resource. You have stuff in here about Afrofuturism, stuff, the fiction of Octavia Butler, an entire section called Looking at Race, where you have, Derek Bell, W.E.B. Du Bois, Frantz Fanon, Ibram Kendi, this section, Historical Matters, particularly dealing with religious history, that I think is good, and the Black experience in the context of religious history. An entire section on Cone. So, which I don't, is this exhaustive of Cone's work?
Yeah, I did.
Nice.
I did the full list, other than there are a couple of compilations of primary source documents that he edited that I didn't put on the list.
Okay. And then, of course, the Katie Cannon section. Now, you said you wanted to expand the womanist section some.
Yeah.
So are there other sections you're looking at adding? Like, what's some of the...
So there is the womanist section. It's coming. I know the books that I want to put on it. I just haven't gotten around to updating the syllabus. So the womanist section, the Egyptian mythology section, if I can find enough resources to make it a full section. Otherwise, I might throw it in as an addendum of some type. And then there is a Black theology section. And then I want to look at at African theology and African biblicism. So those are the areas that I'm researching more now, so I can make it more expansive than just U.S. Black people looking at.
So when you talk about African biblicism, does that cover it all? Sort of like, would that cover? Because when I hear biblicism, I think of like I often hear it in terms of fundamentalist interpretations of scripture, like and having to deal with biblicism in theology and in church settings, or and so my thought is that going to cover maybe even the colonialist influence upon African theology?
Most I'm trying. It's hard to find decolonized theologies anywhere. Even, for those of us who were in liberation theology going, it's hard to decolonize. So talking the African biblicism that I'm looking at is, how do we break from the colonial past that we had? And how do we look at theology anew with African eyes and not through the white gaze?
So I'm looking at the syllabus. So do you think there will be a point where you add in even like, because I am wondering like what the pedagogy would be in terms of not just teaching the material you've listed, but ways that you would maybe parallel these texts with the movie Black Panther in terms of pedagogy, how you might even throw in some comic books that would like illustrate some of this. Like, is there any, like, in terms of how this would be taught, how would you pedagogically combine the material you have here with the pop culture discussion?
Mainly, I don't think it would be one class or one course, because the Dora Milaje to me deserve a class all on their own. And the whole idea of women in power, and especially women in theology, the idea of power in theology and how we deal with that. Because, we have biblical stories of women in power. Not many, but there are some. And, Eastern religion is full of female gods. So it becomes, what do we mean by power? And so I could picture somebody doing that type of class. Then there's the whole parent dynamic, parent-child with Black Panther's mother, and how you deal with parenthood in a non-colonized context. So those are the two that I've seen where I know I would hope somebody would bring in the comics themselves.
Cool. Brian, I am told in the chat you have a question, which...
Well, yeah. So I want to get in a little bit of the sort of the nuts and bolts of Black Panther itself, but is Black Panther sort of the first mainstream Afrofuturism? I can't think of any. The things, a couple of things on your syllabus, like Octavia Butler, make me go, she was out there, but I don't know if she was really mainstream.
She was not mainstream.
Right.
Now that Black Panther brought Octavia Butler, kind of brought her into the mainstream.
Right.
But Trump did it more. I'll just put that out there. Trump really did.
Can you say more about that? How'd that work?
A lot of things that she wrote, especially in Parable of the Sower, just were like foreshadowing somebody like him.
Yeah.
And so people who had read her were like, she was telling us this 25 years ago.
Right.
If we had listened to her then, kind of thing. But yeah, she was, for the most part, mostly in Black literature circles.
Right.
And a few sci-fi people really, really loved her, but she was mostly in Black literature circles. And then all of a sudden, she's become mainstream.
But I think it's also, we have now an explosion sort of beyond Black Panther and the comics, we see the rise of, because you also have Anedi Okorafor on your list, and you also have N.K. Jemisin writing for sort of the DC. There's so many more, there's much more awareness of the of authors and writers and topics and themes that I think it's really wonderful. And I was really surprised that those weren't necessarily all into the syllabus. Your syllabus is amazing. I just didn't know if you like this is a way to help start read that.
I want to add N.K. Jemisin because I love, when are we going to get to Black Futures Month?
Yeah, right.
That to me is the whole shebang. It's like, there are Black people in the future. At some point, people will realize that.
It's not just Buck Rogers?
Yeah, it's not just Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Yeah, no.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
So I want to add NK. I just hadn't decided which ones of her work to do. But I think it's strange in a way that we're at this moment in time right now, where people are paying attention in ways that they weren't before, or the mass, let me put it that way. The masses are paying attention in a way that they weren't before. And in so many ways, that's a wonderful thing. And in so many other ways, it is so frustrating. Because it's like, welcome to the fight. We've been in it for a while. Here's you got to catch up because this train is moving, kind of thing. Yeah. But in a lot of ways, I think the end of the movie, where where T'Challa goes to the UN, is much more about kind of the moment that we're in that there is a wisdom in both African and African diaspora thinking that if the rest of the world paid attention to it, we might actually move further ahead. So
that final bit, right, where he goes to the UN, right, and says Wakanda is here, right? And because I couldn't help but hear that then in your conversation around colonization, around is this the time where, like, we are going to do this, but we're going to do this on our terms, not yours. We're gonna engage the rest of the world, not have the rest of the world engage us.
Well, I mean, so this would actually be a combination of both the comic and the movie,
right?
Because Wakanda had purposefully withdrawn from the world, and that them saying we're coming in on our terms and not yours is the only thing they could actually do, because they could have just stayed in Wakanda and kept building and kept having the marvelous life that it looks like most Wakandans had, and let the world go to pot. It's like, see you wouldn't want to be you kind of thing.
Which is still them acting on their own terms.
Right.
We don't have to engage that.
Right. We don't have to. But because sometimes the world makes it so that you kind of have to engage it. Him coming to the UN going, okay, we're doing it, but it really is going to be on our terms, I don't know if it's the ultimate decolonial statement or anti-colonial statement, but it comes really close.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that scene. I know that scene and Wakanda's solution does end up getting some criticism because it ends up, whereas you have Killmonger, and one of the essays I was reading last night for our volume actually was talking about this, how there is like this, the way Western media portrays any sort of radical, any sort of political radicalism, it always makes it just villainous enough to where it's like, this guy makes a good point, but he's like violent, he's a villain, oh thank God. Like, and so I know that there's been a little bit of criticism of that ending to Black Panther, in that it sort of falls back into sort of some neoliberal, classical liberal tropes of like philanthropy is the way to change everything. And I don't know your politics too much, but I know that that's something a lot of people have criticized.
Yeah, and I have friends who've made that argument with me, and I see it, and depending on the day, I agree with it. I had, my chapter in the book, once I finish it, is,
yeah, I haven't read it. You say it like I've read it.
yeah,
I haven't read it yet.
Is actually focuses a lot on Eric Stevens, and because I don't use his colonizer nickname. So while on the surface he was a radical, and he did have some radical thoughts, I've never considered him a radical. I actually think he was much more a sociopath than a radical. He was a sociopath that had a couple of good ideas. Because his treatment of women, to me, just automatically makes him not a radical. So, and my politics are, in the U.S. context, they're radical. I mean, but it's real, again, like, my past life was in political science. It's really hard to classify most Black people in the U.S. as liberal or conservative, because those terms don't really fit most Black people's actual lived experience and how they think about what the role of government is. So when I talk about Black politics, I say throw out all the terms that we normally think about, because they don't make sense. They absolutely do not make sense in the U.S. context. They actually don't. They don't make sense if you're part of the African diaspora, because the main drive of the African diaspora has been survival. And politics, when you're talking about survival, is a very different thing than when you're talking about politics when you're part of the majority. And so it's been a while since I've used straight political terms. If I were in continental Europe, I'd be on the really far left. Because I think there are just some things we know now that they didn't know a few hundred years ago. But, as Ursula Goodenough, who was a physicist astronomer here at Washington University, would say, that's an end of the day type of question.
Kim, I have a quick question. I know we're going to be wrapping up shortly. I want to talk a little bit more about the theological aspect. I know you touched on it earlier, but can you actually speak to briefly I think the full title of the course is The Theology of Wakanda. So, okay.
Wakanda Forever.
Wakanda Forever.
Wakanda Forever. I think in if we did it in straight Christian theology terms, it's the question of what is a savior. So we would be talking, I mean, that Black Panther is actually asking the question of Christology. And what is a savior? What does a savior look like? Who can be a savior? Because for those who don't know what the new set of comics do, I mean, Shuri is Black Panther now. So it's, you know, who can be a savior? What does a savior look like? What does it mean to need saving? Do we need saving? There are lots of questions that I think Black Panther raises in a theological context that we don't talk about a lot anymore. And granted, there are a whole bunch of books about Christology that come out every year. There are a whole bunch that talk about soteriology. Yeah, but they act as if, I'll say it this way. They act as if history didn't happen in a way, or that looking at it from the West, or especially from the US, in whether we're actually the empire in decline or not would be a question. But what does it mean to look at questions of salvation and saviors in actual context? And I don't think most books about Christology and soteriology do that.
I think that's an interesting take on it, especially since it has a bit of a messianic message, because the Black Panther character was written by two Jewish men,
right,
who felt as though the Black community needed a hero, needed someone that looked like them. So, I mean, it's kind of like connecting those dots, and like, I love how you frame that. What does a hero look like? And for Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, brown and Black folks needed a hero that looked like them in their creation of Black Panther. So I think that is spot on, and it's a language that I think can translate to any culture and to any people. To see someone reflective of that particular community. And I didn't hear or know about Black Panther until I heard about the release of the movie was coming. That was all the way in like 2015, 2016, which is part of the reason why I ended up reading the comics and learning more about Ta-Nehisi Coates and his work around Black Panther. And so, yeah, but I am looking forward to learning more and seeing how this course goes. If you see Shayna Watson on your roster, know that I am taking your class. So I'm going to turn this back over to Matt before we enter into our Theo Connections portion of the show.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have one final question, because as a white man, I can't help but center myself because of power dynamics. And that joke will make sense when I ask this question. So Martin Freeman's character, I often get curious, do you think that that's an example of good ally? Because I've heard two different takes on this. I've heard it's good allyship because on the one hand, he does everything Shuri tells him. You know, you sort of see him get silenced by like M'Baku, and like there are all those moments, right, where like he gets decentered. I've also heard criticisms though that like it's like when he's flying the ship and he blows up the weapons as they're leaving Wakanda, it's like, well, of course the white man saves the day. Like, what do you think of that? Do you think that analogy of Freeman's character as good allyship holds up?
Not really, because I've never considered him I never considered that character anything other than what he was, which was a CIA agent.
He was a hobbit too. So.
Well, yeah, I mean that's good. That's good.
Just saying.
I mean that's a good crossover. But I always saw him as what he was. He's a CIA agent. The CIA is always gonna have an ulterior motive. Whether you like the character or not, he has a goal in mind, and the goal of the U.S. in this was always shady, because if you remember, go back to when they were in Korea, and he's going to try to get the vibranium too. So it's not as if the U.S. was a neutral character in the film. They always had an ulterior motive. He ended up doing something good, great. We can actually, clap that he listened to Shuri and blew up the ship. But ally is not a word I would use for that character. So I don't want to end it on a bad note. He's not a horrible character. He is what he is. And he's in that context, he's the US and he's not a neutral player.
Cool. That's a good point. Yeah. Shana, do we want to go to Theo conversations? Is that?
Absolutely. And I do to Kim's point, how we are defining alliances and personal interests, and always constantly trying to check out what is white fragility, and is it for self? Are we aligning ourselves with different groups and different causes is for personal interests and self gains, or are we committing selfless acts? And in this case, with his character as an agent, we really don't know the motive, but we just know that something good did come out of it. And sometimes we just have to hold on to hope that it's always the purest intentions behind alliances. So thank you for your insight. In TheoCon Connections, Kim, what we normally do is invite our special guest and others who are on this segment to share any type of plugs or ads, something to further push your curriculum, I cannot talk right now, where you're going to be offering the curriculum. Is it online? Is it in person? How can we follow you, tune in, all of your social media tags and all that good stuff?
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is read romance novels, since I brought that up earlier. They are good for you.
Yes.
They are always good for you. And there's, for whatever type of books you like to read, trust me, there's a romance novel in that genre. There are romance novels everywhere. And actually, part of the reason I always plug romance novels is that people who read romance tend to get looked down on. So I want us to remember that romance is good. Happily ever afters are good sometimes, especially in a world where too much is going on. As far as the curriculum goes, one of these days, I will actually teach this as a class. It will probably be through Starr King School for the Ministry, where I do a lot of my adjunct work, which is, for those of you who are looking online, it's sksm.edu. It's Starr King is, if not the most progressive, it's one of 2 or 3 of the most progressive seminaries in the country. It is official now. So they are moving from Berkeley to Oakland. So they will be on, when they're actually back on physical campuses, they will be on the campus of Mills College in Oakland. And they're a good group. They're good eggs.
How about any social media tags for you? How can we follow you, Kim?
I'm on Facebook. My Facebook is my full name, which is Kimberly Rochelle Hampton. You can find me on Facebook. I am on Twitter, and I'm actually going to give my actual Twitter address. I have 2. One is a professional that I haven't even really built up yet, which is Wakanda Theology, at Wakanda Theology. But my personal one is at Rain, RAINE, KCKASEY. And my name on Twitter, is Iola Leroy, which is the main character of a book by 19th century Afrofeminist Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. It's a great book that should get more play, and she's a person people should know. But that's me on social media.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kim.
We will put that in the show notes here. I'm sorry. We'll put that in the show notes so folks can check that out.
Thank you for that. And Brian, I was going to ask both you and Matt if you have any brief ads you want to plug in for Church of the Geek.
Church of the Geek, we just put out our most recent episode. We talked with two creators of a fanfic comic for sort of Star Wars. So that's up. Redeeming Fanfic with Darth Krell is the name of the title. But yeah, we continue to come out. Sam and I put an episode out about every other week. So that continues.
Awesome. Matt, how about you? Poppin' Theology.
Yeah, the website, which you can find www.antheology, all one word, .com. Generally, I post something new every Monday. I have to figure out what I'm posting tomorrow. This might be a skip week because I'm taking care of someone this week who just had an operation.
And you say this week, but that might be next week.
Oh, right.
For the people who are watching, because it's future.
4 days ago. Yeah,
it will be past if you're watching this now.
No, that's good.
Temporal mechanics.
I just Avengers Endgamed us. The Theology in Westworld volume from the Theology in Pop Culture series is out in physical hard copy. It should be out in ebook on the 16th. As always, I can provide the 30% discount, but as I've been saying on Twitter, because academic publishing makes no sense and they publish everything way too expensive in hardcover first, the route to go here is to probably ask your local or school or university library to carry it, which would make it more accessible to people, and then hopefully enough sell that they move it to paperback, and then real people can buy them.
I do want to say the Church of the Geek made that case before it even came out. I'm just saying. When you were on, we said that, do it, and you're like, no, buy the book. But I'm glad to see you come around to our position. Thank you, man.
Yeah, I totally forgot that. You're supposed to have me on to talk about Watchmen, by the way. But
I know.
Well, I was getting ready to ask, have you done something about Watchmen?
It is on our list. So, gotta get my other co-host to finally get it watched so he can actually speak coherently about it, because I won't be able to. I just don't speak coherently. So we need him. No. But yeah, that's on our list. Definitely. It's so good.
I would love to do a religion or theology and Watchmen book for either. Especially because when we can't talk about this now. No. Point is, Westworld's coming out. Prince is out. I'm trying to get out a Game of Thrones volume and this Black Panther volume Kim and I are working on that. All of them have suffered various delays and whatever. So because we had a few delinquent people and then people went AWOL, disappeared. It was a whole thing.
Oh, really? Who were they, Matt? Who are they? I'm just curious again. Who are the delinquent?
No, I'm not going to sell them out. I'm not going to sell them out.
Oh my goodness. Friends, thank you so much for tuning in to Where Theology Meets Pop Culture for TheoCon with our special guest, Kim Hampton. We are super nerdy and super geeky, and we will ramble on about the most randomness of stuff. So stick around and find out what else we are talking about in pop culture and theological world. Again, I am Shayna Watson. Please tune in. Our release is every Thursday for our TheoCon on Thursday shows. And again, Kim, so thankful for you. Brian.
Third Thursday. Sorry, not every Thursday.
No, not every Thursday. Third Thursday.
Third Thursday. Yeah.
Third Thursday.
Third Thursday.
Third Thursday.
Oh, thanks again, folks. Take care.